Now, Alan, you write in your piece that support for nuclear power in Australia is already high and growing. Should we start building before we end up in a mess?
Well, yes and no. I mean, the issue about nuclear is that it certainly isn't as low cost as coal for Australia. For some countries, it's very low cost, it's very cheap. If you're talking about Japan, talking about France, most countries in Europe. But here we've got such great resources in coal, and it's so easily mined, and it's so close to the population centers and all that sort of business. Coal will always be, at least for the foreseeable future, more economic than nuclear. But there are regions where nuclear might well be economic. For example, South Australia would work there. It might elsewhere. But the answer is that we are the only major country in the world which actually bans nuclear power generation. It's illegal here. Almost every other developed country of any size, anyway, has got a nuclear plant, and it's a fine sort of form of energy. It's reliable. It's relatively low cost. But whether it will come online, I'm not sure. What we've seen, though, we have seen a turnaround somewhat in terms of public opinion polls, and we had an interesting one following a debate on nuclear in Q&A on the ABC, and the ABC audience is, of course, left-leaning, but nonetheless, a very high proportion, over 60%, said yes, we ought to permit nuclear in Australia. So I think that's an interesting turn point. I mean, as others would point out, it's all very well making that sort of a generalized statement, but I can imagine how the Greens and the Labour Party, if they oppose this as a system, would be coming in saying, yeah, where are you having it, next to your house or next to your city, or what are you going to do with the waste? And there will then be a sort of a chorus of opposition to it again. But, it is encouraging to see that people are realizing that nuclear is a possibility. And some of that is because there is an acceptance now, at least a tacit acceptance, that, why have power prices gone up? How come I'm paying twice as much my electricity as I used to? What's caused this, especially when the government and both political parties, Labour more than the Liberals, have been saying, look, the cheapest form of energy is renewables, and we're going to be subsidising them. They don't actually say they're subsidising them. We're going to be assisting them, and gradually they're going to take over, and we'll have 80% of it will be renewables by 2030 and all that sort of business. We can see the progress of that isn't with prices actually going down, but going up, and most people can see that, and so they are considering alternatives.
Yes, well, we need to stop talking about the price of energy over the next 10 years and start talking about what the cost of energy production looks like over 100 years. Because by the time you've replaced your wind turbines and your solar panels and your battery farms that go with them and all of the infrastructure that's required for them, you've done that 4 or 5 times in 100 years, and the cost of renewables at that point becomes exponentially more expensive than even the nearest competitor, whereas nuclear energy over 100 years tends toward almost zero, which is what the Europeans have noticed, and why France and Germany, when they use their nuclear power plants, have some of the cheapest energy on the face of the planet. And we never hear anybody talk honestly about the real cost of energy over time. And I think it's basically a lie from the Labor Party to say that renewables are the cheapest form of energy. They certainly are not over any lifetime period of the technology. But the Liberals seem to be warming up to nuclear, Alan. But they've been in power, or they were in power for a very long time. Did they miss their opportunity to champion this cause?
I think there's yes, the Liberals were delinquent in terms of doing anything about it, and now they say they will do something about it. And it's a good idea to actually have this on the table. And there may well be a situation and over time where nuclear becomes cheaper than coal, but at the present time it's not. And as you say, the worst thing we have is the renewables. It's not so much that the renewables will cost more over time. It's just that the more you have of them, the more they cost to actually firm them. It's all very well when you had 1 or 2% of the market was supplied by renewables. Well, that was relatively cheap because you had a huge infrastructure. But you've got to build an entirely new infrastructure if you're going to have a renewables-rich system. You've got to have a whole lot more transmission lines, and that's an issue at the present time where people don't like the lines going over their land, and it's an issue of cost as well. And you've got a whole lot of battery backup, which is 3 or 4 times the actual cost of the renewable plant itself. So the end product is that you could probably do this with renewables, but you're talking 4, 5, or 6 times the price of electricity at the present time. And all the government does is shrugs its shoulders and say, well, something will turn up. Well, it's not happened so far, and it's unlikely to, really.